Good evening, friends. My name is Rabbi Yitzchok Tiechtel with Chabad of Nashville, and I welcome you once again to another edition of Parsha Perspectives. Parsha Perspectives is an opportunity for us to get together once a week and learn a lesson and an insight into the weekly Torah portion based on the teachings of Chassidus, Jewish mysticism. And every week when we study together, the take-home is something related to your own personal journey in life, to live a life filled with meaning and purpose. They tell the story about a man named Sam. He comes home one day with a brand new refrigerator. Now, since the old one worked, he hauled it out onto the sidewalk in front of his home and he taped a sign to it, "Free refrigerator." For 2 weeks, the old refrigerator sat in his lawn. And the only person who expressed any interest was a city inspector who threatened to ticket him for leaving junk out on the street. So Sam thought, I got another solution. He peels off from the refrigerator the note, "Free refrigerator," and he replaces it with a new one, which actually said, "Excellent refrigerator for sale, $400. Sure enough, as you can imagine, in 1 hour, the fridge was stolen. Friends, this week we read a portion of the Torah called Parshat Ekev. Moshe Rabbeinu, he continues his farewell speech to the people of Israel. And he reviews all the trials and tribulations of their 40 years in the desert. And he implores them to learn and grow from all of their experiences. One of the things that Moshe reminds them is about the manna. It was the bread that descended from heaven daily to sustain them. But he does so in a rather very jarring way. And he tells them in Deuteronomy chapter 8, and he says, "And you shall remember everything that God did for you. He brought you for these 40 years into the wilderness to afflict you and to test you. And he afflicted you and he let you go hungry. And he fed you with the manna, which you didn't know what it was, and nor did your forefathers know." And a few verses later he mentions, God fed you with the manna in the desert, which your forefathers didn't know, in order to afflict you and in order to test you, to benefit you in the end. The question is asked, why is the manna described as affliction? For how can we say the very verse that nourished them day in, day out for 40 years, that it caused them hunger, that it's called bread of affliction? And the Talmud in Yuma explains that there was something very peculiar about the manna. When you ate the manna, it sustained you and kept you alive. But you never ever felt full, because the manna never gave you this sense of satisfaction and being satiated that you get when you eat a big steak. You go to a steakhouse and you eat a lot of bread or good meat, you go, The manna always left you with feelings of hunger and affliction. In fact, the word is from the word affliction. The Talmud derives the law of fasting on Yom Kippur from the verse that says in the Torah, "You shall afflict yourself on the 9th day in the 9th day of Tishrei, from the evening until the morning." But Moshe Rabbeinu's words and the Talmud's explanation are difficult to digest. How could you say the manna is affliction when the manna satiated the Jews for 40 years in the desert? So firstly, think about it. It's hard to imagine that God would send the people food that lacked basic nutrients to make them full. I'm sure he would have enriched this heavenly bread, the manna, with the same carbohydrates and fibers and vitamins and minerals as ordinary bread. And indeed, it says that at the end of the day, the manna had the perfect amount for every person. It sustained everybody just what they needed. So why did they always feel hungry after it, if it was just what they needed? And secondly, calling the manna affliction and saying that it left the people hungry seems that it flies in the face of everything we know about it. Think about it. This was a heavenly gift. It lasted 40 years. Free food came down from above. It was an expression of God's tremendous love for his people. And the Torah actually makes a point of telling us that the manna fell in the morning, emphasizing the convenient and loving way in which it just came from above right to where you needed it in the morning. Just the amount you needed. And the Medrash adds that for the righteous, it It would actually be on their doorsteps. They didn't even have to go and collect it. And it came like in a wrapping of jewelry and precious stones. It was wrapped with the dew on bottom and dew on top. It was like delivered fresh bread to your door every day. And even more, the Jewish people experienced many great miracles throughout their journey in Egypt and throughout the many years in the desert. But out of all of them, the only one they were commanded to preserve and keep a memento of this was the manna. As it says actually in the Torah, in Parshat Beshalach, it says as follows: this is the thing that God commanded. Let 1 omer of it, a certain measurement of this manna, be preserved for generations, in order, it says, that they should see the bread that I fed you in the desert when I took you out of the land of Egypt. So what happened? Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, he filled a jar with the manna, and where did he place it? He placed it in the holiest place in the world. That was the Ark of the Testimony, the Ark of the Covenant. And that was placed in the Holy of Holies. So there can hardly be a more telling sign of this manna's greatness and the degree which God showed love and he cherished the Jewish people by giving it them every day. And in fact, until this very day, we actually regularly reference the miracle of the manna, weekly and even daily. So consider the origin of the first blessing and the grace after meals, which we say after we eat bread. What do? We bless God and refer to Him as Hazan Es HaKol, the one who sustains everything. And according to this tradition, this blessing was actually made up by Moses himself in the desert to thank Hashem and praise God for sustaining us. How did He sustain us? He sustained us with the manna. And the first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, explains in Likutei Torah, is why it is until the second blessing that we thank God for the land of Israel, ala oretz v'ala mazon, for the earth that produces the sustenance. He says because there cannot be any mention of the earth in the first blessing, that because Moshe Rabbeinu enacted it to thank God for the earth, for the food that came from heaven. It's not the food that came from earth. Only when the Jewish people entered the land and they started farming and working in the fields did Joshua enact the second blessing, thanking God for the land, which is ala oretz v'ala mazon. And of course we know that on Shabbos, Shabbat, we make the hamotzi, not on 1 loaf of bread, but on 2 loaves of challah. Why? It may surprise you to know that the reason for this tradition is actually to pay homage to the miracle of the manna, which fell in a double portion on Friday, so they wouldn't have to go and collect it on Shabbat. And additionally, one of the reasons we actually cover the challah, there's a challah cover on the table, is to recall the manna. Because just like the manna was wrapped in a layer of dew on the bottom and a layer of dew on top, we actually put the challahs between the challah cover and the tablecloth below. So that is to remind us of the manna. And in terms of wonders and miracles, the miracle of manna was no slouch. Because if so, it's difficult indeed to understand how such an amazing phenomena could be called a source of affliction. I mean, how could such a delicious miracle have been defective in the most basic property, its ability to make a person feel satiated? Why didn't they feel full at the end of the day? Now, friends, the Rebbe always looked at things through an interesting different lens, different angle. And he looked at this matter through this lens. He showed us that the whole concept of the manna can be seen in a whole new light. And the Rebbe explains something so beautiful, so insightful, so relevant. It seems especially direct and impactful in today's day and age. In a time where the world is in so much chaos, so much unpredictability with everything going on in the world. And the Rebbe says, the manna lacked no carbohydrates or dietary fibers. The manna had all the nutrients a person could need. And it filled a person's belly as much as the physical food. The problem was something else entirely. The uncertainty that came along with the manna. And the Rebbe says, when the manna first fell, God gave one simple rule. You cannot leave anything over until tomorrow morning. That means the expiration date for the manna was always today. You couldn't eat today's manna tomorrow. As 2 of the rabble-rousers, wicked people called Dasan and Aviram, they learned when they try to go against the system. It didn't work. They left some manna overnight, and what happened by the morning? It got spoiled. It was infested with worms. And this gave rise to a strange situation. You always have food for today, but you never had anything for tomorrow. That means every night in the desert, they went to bed, imagine, with a refrigerator that was empty. And in mind, you could have had worrying thoughts. I mean, who knows what we're going to have when we wake up tomorrow morning? Imagine going to sleep with an empty fridge. What am I going to do tomorrow morning? There was no savings account. There was no IRA. There were no pensions for the manna. And there was no, even if you had cash, you had no use of it. And there was only one thing on the menu, it was manna. And there was no alternative of vegetables or different types of things that can feed, ways to feed people, millions of people in the desert. Friends, couldn't there be a more stressful way to live? Economic stability and reliable access to provisions are amongst most of the basic things that a human being needs. As part of the famous hierarchy of needs created by the famous Jewish American psychologist, you all know, Abraham Maslow. And he says that there's 5 things in the pyramid of a human needs. And what is the bottom tier? The most important of all of their needs, at least he determined, to be a basic need, was like food, sleep, and warmth. And the tier above that includes physical security and stability in one's life. Only then comes the spiritual and emotional needs, he says, like friendship, like belonging, like prestige, etc. What does this mean? This means that right up there with human needs, for example, to eat, is the human need to know that you're going to have what to eat tomorrow. People need stability. People need certainty. People want life without surprises. And this explains the hunger of the manna. It's not that they had nothing to eat, but that they felt hunger and anxiety when thinking about what's going to be tomorrow, what tomorrow will bring. But why? Why did God set it up this way? That the bread should fall each day from heaven, but expire on that day? I mean, why wouldn't he let them have a little left over for the next day, put it in a nice Ziploc bag, squeeze out the ear, or put it in a fridge, something stored for tomorrow, or even stick it in the freezer? The manna can last for months. And like this, people would sleep better at night. Why did God set it up this way? So in code of Jewish law called Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe gives us a very important clue. And he writes as follows. He says, it is proper to recite the passage about the manna every day, to trust in God who gives food, each day's food in its time. Now, this is not recited in the Chabad Siddur, it's in the Art Scroll Siddur, but it's something that was put into the Siddur. The desert years, actually, the 40 years in the desert, were a school of life. It was a crash course in developing a relationship between the Jewish people and God. It was actually a cornerstone of that relationship that was going to build a trust that God will provide food for us every single day. And that's what God actually did. He took from them, I would say, the trust that they had in themselves to create a trust in a God above. He took from the people their natural self-confidence to elevate them to a higher space of spiritual confidence. He actually replaced the illusion of certainty with the real certainty that comes when a person realizes that there's only one being in which we can rely, and that is God, the Almighty God, who's truly in charge, and God never neglects anyone. So the commandment to gather each day's manna on that, and only on that day, was actually intended to instill in us the recognition that we have a partner above, and that the responsibility in providing for ourselves does rest on our shoulders alone. It's not just on us, it's in the believing of the one above. As the sage just said, who he created every day, he's the one who creates sustenance. He gives everything to the human being that they shouldn't have to worry. And God has to give it to us, like a father is obligated to provide bread for his children by virtue of the fact that he brought them into this world. So too does God take the responsibility for the livelihood of those who he brought into the world. That doesn't mean you can sit back and do nothing. Of course, you need to roll up your sleeves And you need to utilize all the means to earn a living. Just like our ancestors, they had to go out and collect the manna, and they had to bring it home. But also, friends, you need to remember that we're not alone in this project. As King David says in Psalm 23, God is my shepherd, I shall lack nothing. And God is like a faithful shepherd who bears the responsibility of finding the best pastures for his flock. And therefore we must know that we are never alone. An old anecdote notes that the Hebrew word for worry is called daga, and it's comprised of 4 letters in Hebrew: Aleph, Gimel, Daled, Hey. And these are 4 of the first 5 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. It's missing 1 letter, the Beis, the second one. Because the answer is that Beis stands for bitachon, trust. When you have the bait for bitachon, there's no such a thing as daga. There's no such a thing for worry. When you trust, let go, don't worry. And this message is perhaps more relevant today than ever. For we live in a time when there's constantly hear the phrase, I don't know, we don't know what's going to happen, when the interest rates are going up, how the economy is going to do, what food prices are going up, gas prices are going up, what's going to be, and we just don't know what's going to happen here. Housing market, people trying to sell their homes, they put it on the market, off the market, and we really can't even make predictions about the economy in whichever field we work, because we don't know what's going to happen or what the future is. We don't know what regulations and rules will come and will go. So much unpredictability in this world, as we have seen, especially during the recent pandemic, when things were on a high and a low. It was literally, like we say in Purim, ad lo yada. You just don't know. And perhaps the lesson is this very point, that we don't know. God knows. And we have to let go and know He is going to take care of us. You see, many people in this modern world try to live life without God. And they created some sort of a progressive society. And they say, we know how to solve all problems. But as we have seen, a sense of security was taken from us. And the only constant thing that remains true in our lives is that we're in the hands of God. And they are the surest hands to be in. Because a creator never neglects his creations. A father never forsakes his children. God always provides for his people. They tell a story. In the middle of a cold winter in Ukraine, a group of Jewish children in the town of Annapolis, they were up to making trouble. So they put a plank over a muddy puddle, and anytime someone approached this board to cross the puddle, they would drag the plank, and causing this unsuspecting victim, to slip in the mud. One time, as they finished playing this trick, they were dismayed to see that this time their victim was no one else than the famous Hasidic master, Rabbi Yitzchok of Annapolis himself, a great holy sage. And they knew at this point the mischief has gone too far. They hung their heads in shame. They had no idea how to get out of this predicament. They felt so bad. The boys ran home to tell their parents, and the leader went to tell his father what he did. And the father said, listen, you need to go to Rabbi Yitzchok and appease him. And they thought, what can we do to appease him? And the father had an idea. He knew that this holy man, Rabbi Yitzchok, would pray for many hours every day. And he started early in the morning, and he finished after 1 in the afternoon. And then he would remain in the synagogue, spending several more hours studying Torah. This Rabbi Yitzchok, he didn't even go home for a meal during the day. I was probably hungry most of the time. So it was decided that tomorrow, these group of troublemaker boys are going to deliver a hearty breakfast to the holy sage Rabbi Yitzchok of Annapolis. And surely he's going to appreciate it, and he will forgive these boys for the trouble, for the mischief they did. Friends, the next morning, the whole family was up early and bright in the morning. They prepared the most beautiful breakfast with pancakes and fruit and all types of French toast and omelets. And they said they're going to bring it to Rabbi Yitzchok. And at noon, when the rabbi finished praying, the boys brought it into the synagogue. And they placed this tray in front of the rabbi, Rabbi Yitzchok, and they left, feeling much better about themselves. And when the boys exited the synagogue, they saw a strange man standing there. And he was shocked beyond belief. He was about to faint. This man explained that he was actually the assistant of Rabbi Yitzchok. He was the attendant. And he said every day, when Reb Zusha finishes praying, around noon, he lifts his eyes heavenwards and he goes like this, Tata in Himmel, Father in heaven, Zusha is hungry. And that was my sign that I was supposed to bring in a meager meal, something to feed him, some bread and water. And this was going on for years. But yesterday I said, enough is enough. How could Reb Zusha sit there and present like his meal is coming from heaven when he knows full well that it comes from me after I spend an hour preparing it? What's he crying? Father, send me food. I'm the one who's bringing the food. So today I decided I'm going to teach him a lesson. Let him ask God for food and see that today there won't be a meal because I didn't make one. So here I was waiting for Reb Zusha to say, Tata Zisa, Zusha is hungry, Father in heaven. Zusha is hungry. So I said, I want to teach him about this lesson. But then you came in carrying a full tray of a delicious gourmet breakfast. Friends, this man realized that Reb Zusha was actually absolutely right because the food all comes from God. It's not from the attendant. On a similar note, I once heard an interesting thought about the Pesach Seder. You know, towards the beginning of the Seder, we do yachatz. We take out 3 matzahs and we break the middle one in 2. And one of the parts remains on the table. What do we do with the bigger part? We put it in a hiding place. Children go look for it. But at the end of the meal, the hidden matzah, we take it out and we eat it for one of the final steps called the afikoman. Have you ever wondered what's the purpose of this exercise? I mean, why hide the matzah in order to go find it? I mean, seemingly we should either hide it and forget about it or don't hide it at all. Friends, there's a very important lesson here. The Seder is actually meant to relive the experience of leaving Egypt. Because when we first leave Egypt, we are slowly like slaves. We're just starting out and trying to begin a new life. In this state, we still suffer from a slave mentality. You know? And any food we actually get, we want to hide it away. It's like a savings plan. Maybe there's going to be hard days ahead. And we actually have a hard time believing that the good fortune is ours and that God gives us something that's going to be part of ours forever. And we're just afraid that we're going to lose it. So we hold back some to ourselves. What happens? We finish reading the Haggadah. It describes how God took care of our ancestors. And He provided for their everyday need at every step of the way. For example, first He split the sea. And then He provides for their needs in the desert for 40 years and He gave us their manna. Then we can take out the matzah that we've hidden away, that we thought that we have to rely on, and enjoy it. This beautiful mitzvah that is. Because at this point, we're mature enough to realize we don't have to worry. We take it out and say there's no more hiding. Because God is going to continue to take care of us. Then, now, and always in the future. Indeed. Because of the way the Jewish people lived their life at the end of the desert, with more faith in God, may God bestow an abundance of blessings, of material prosperity, physical prosperity. May God fulfill the wishes of your heart's desires for good, for blessing, as we say, Yemali Hashem, kol mish'ales libcha l'tova. May God fulfill all of the wishes of your heart, and desires of your heart for good. But the one key for living a life of calmness, of peace, is in God we trust. As it says on the American dollar bill, in God we trust. Know that God has taken care of our ancestors. He's taking care of us today, and He will take care of us in the future. May we merit the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days, and we say, Amen.